Do you have any advice for a new or solo dev?
Let me lay out the game plan that I specifically would use if I had to start from scratch.
You did a pretty robust prototyping cycle.
Also, I think prototyping for game mechanics is maybe not actually what you should be doing.
What are you planning for, let's say, the next 3 years?
Don't have as much of a clear path anymore because everybody tells sort of a different story about what worked.
Welcome to the Dev Dream Podcast, featuring conversations to keep both you and me inspired on our journey of making games. Today, I am feeling incredibly lucky because I got to interview one of the people that actually inspired me way back in 2020 when I started this game development journey. And this person is none other than Jonas Tyroller. Now, if somehow you have not heard of Jonas, he is one of the most prominent game developers on YouTube, and he also worked on Islanders, which was a very successful launch. He solo released a game called You Snail, and most recently, back with Grizzly Games, he released Thronefall, which again has surpassed 1 million copies, just like Islanders did. Now today I got to ask him a little bit about each of those games, what it was like developing them, what kind of challenges he had, and more really interesting things like that. He also at one point even laid out his exact game plan of how he would start game dev if he had to restart from scratch today. This is ahead and many more things. Now, if you enjoy this conversation, you can actually help me out by utilizing a new YouTube feature that I've just unlocked. So this is called hyping, and it's YouTube's new way of boosting small creators like myself. It's only available to small creators, and you can utilize this feature by going down to your comment section, and just above it, there's a little button that says hype. You get 3 hypes a week, and if you would be willing to spend one of your hypes on this video, it pushes it out to more people and helps a small channel like this one. Now, with that being said, I'm so excited to share this incredible conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as well. I would love to just jump straight in. I think it would be really interesting to just ask you about a couple of the commercial games you've released. And I'd love to start with Thronefall, which is just a minimalist game about building and defending your little kingdom. So I'm just curious, how many copies have you sold, and why do you think the game was so successful?
Yeah, so I think I can disclose this publicly. We sold over 1 million copies of Thronefall. I think that information is already out there, which is why I don't mind sharing. And why was it so successful? I don't know. Because it's a good game, hopefully.
Yeah, congratulations on 1 million. That's a huge deal. When you released the game, did you feel like it could do that, or has that exceeded expectations?
So we've come close to 1 million copies, and I think also exceeded it with Islanders as well. But when we made Islanders, I was always like, that seems pretty crazy, right? I'm not sure if we can ever reproduce this. And if I almost felt like maybe that's it, right? Maybe the first commercial release we've already peaked. And now being able to do it again feels very satisfying and also very relieving, because now it's like, yeah, okay, this is reproducible, you know? So that was very nice for sure, yeah. It's never a given just to sell 1 million copies. We don't take it for granted.
Yeah, I mean, that's beyond the dreams of a lot of small devs. And so, yeah, I think you should be extremely proud of that. And everyone in the game dev community is cheering you on and excited with you. Another thing that I found really interesting, just as you've shared your development on YouTube with Thronefall, is that you did a pretty robust prototyping cycle, which I haven't seen from at least a lot of other YouTube devs. Do you think you would approach the next game, or maybe you already have, in a similar amount of prototyping? Would you go more prototyping? Kind of where are you at in that idea?
So I've also done a little bit of podcasting on my YouTube channel and talked to a lot of different successful developers about how they approach things. And maybe I could have given a better answer on this before my podcasting ventures. Now I very much feel like I don't have as much of a clear path anymore because everybody tells sort of a different story about what works and what works for them. So now I'm a bit more cautious to tell you what works because there are so many different things that can work. What we did for Thronefall is we started from the fantasy. So this is kind of something we learned during the prototyping of Thronefall. is that it doesn't make too much sense to just prototype around randomly. And also I think prototyping for game mechanics is maybe not actually what you should be doing. I think what you should be doing is you should, with the big asterisks that there are a billion different ways to go about it, right? But this is a workflow that I think works really well for us, and that I think is also reproducible probably for others, is to start with a fantasy, because fantasies to a large degree are what sells games on Steam. And fantasy, what I mean with fantasy is the theme and the game feel. So you're not designing for mechanics, you're designing for the feeling that you want to sell. And for Thronefall, actually, our prototypes were pretty unimpressive and not that effective, actually, until we defined that vision and that fantasy experience that we wanted to sell. So we made a bunch of random prototypes, nothing really clicked, everything was meh, not really working. But then we decided we are gonna make a minimalist game about building and defending a kingdom. We wrote that very big letters on our Miro board, and then we continued prototyping with that fantasy and that vision in mind. And suddenly our ideas, like the quality of our ideas and of our prototypes, improved rapidly, and they were a lot more appealing. And then only shortly after, Paul came up with something that we were like, yeah, that's it. Let's make that one. We had like a very minimal 2D top-down version of Thronefall, essentially, where you could just build fields to gain more coins and towers to better defend against attackers during the night. So it was like the most minimal version of Thronefall you can possibly imagine. But when we saw it, we knew that that's it. Yeah. And I think it's reproducible also, yeah.
That is a really interesting way to approach prototyping. And I think in my head, I would not say that answer as, just thinking about it intuitively. I think you would start with game mechanics, but as you talk through it, game mechanics are probably not that unique a lot of times. And so it does make a lot of sense. Can you help me understand, if you were to approach it today, or if you were to give advice whenever you choose your fantasy, is that just sort of a guess, or are you actually in any way prototyping or maybe comparing different fantasies you might do? Because it sounds like, based on what you said, maybe Thronefall, you just said minimalist kingdom builder, then let's decide what makes that fun. Can you talk to me about that decision?
So in the particular case of Thronefall, we just picked a fantasy that worked well for us, that we wanted to do. And of course, it's also a fantasy that has already been proven to work with many other games before. It's like not a completely crazy out there fantasy. It's like it's a fantasy that has been proven to work, and it was a fantasy that we wanted to work on specifically. So that's how we chose it. But I think in general, the answer to your question is yes. I think it is very much worth it to think about the fantasy and theming about your game as one of the very first questions, and to make a very careful decision about it, and also not to get too fancy about it, right? A lot of game developers, I feel like, have the urge to kind of make it too fancy or put too many twists on it, and then all of a sudden it's something that's way harder to understand. So you want to make sure the fantasy and the experience you're selling is super duper easy to understand. I think that's one of the most important things about the fantasy. And that when people hear it and when they see it, they understand what it's about, right? If people see a screenshot, you want them to understand what the fantasy is. That's step one. And then step number two is people should crave experiencing that fantasy. Like a fantasy, you could imagine it as like an unsatisfied urge of some kind that people need in their life. For example, like something like, I always wish I could be a professional skateboarder, but there's like not any realistic way for me to do that, so I could get to live out this fantasy in a video game, for example. So something like that is, I think, what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, it's reminding me when I one time made a Dungeons and Dragon character, my friend who's a DM said, don't write too much backstory. Don't lock yourself in. Just write a 1 or 2 sentence generic theme of what your character's doing. And it's sounding maybe like you're saying that in the early stages. Is that what I'm hearing? That you shouldn't, maybe don't write a 9-page lore document, but just have a small description of the fantasy that you're approaching.
I think so, yes. So you people, when they see a screenshot of your game, they're not gonna understand 9 pages of lore necessarily. It's like more when you start, you wanna kind of start surface level, right? It's kind of like you're a painter, and the first thing you maybe do is paint the background, put in the big strokes. If the first thing you do is write a 9-page lore document, then that's like already painting the details before you even know if what you're painting makes sense or not.
That's a really good analogy. What was the most difficult challenge that you encountered in the development of Thronefall?
I would definitely say that the initial prototyping phase was a challenge that we eventually overcome by defining a fantasy. And after that, it was fairly smooth because we've made lots of games before. We sort of knew we worked together. It was relatively uncomplicated because there's also only 2 of us, so there's not really that much that can go wrong there. One thing from a technical perspective that I found a bit challenging was all of the pathfinding related stuff for the units, because that was something I hadn't done before. And figuring out all of the quirks of that was definitely a challenge. And then also, because I'm responsible for balancing and so on, there were some balancing challenges, some of which I were able to mitigate and deal with a little bit, but also some of them are still in the game and are just sitting there.
How did you mitigate some of those balancing changes?
So one of the biggest balancing challenge for Thronefall is the snowbally nature of it. It's like a lot of your success in Thronefall depends on your economy and how much economy you have. And if you have too little economy, the game feels way too difficult, and you're like, how the hell am I supposed to beat this? And if you're ahead of the expected economic curve, to say, then it's all not that great, because then it almost doesn't matter what you build. You don't have to build the correct counters anymore. Like, just build anything. You have so much money, you'll just throw money at the problem and the problem will go away, basically. Just build some defenses and you'll solve it. So it's very, very economy dependent, Thronefall. And also the economy is very snowbally, like exponentially so, because you can invest your gold to get more gold in the next round. So especially the economy you build in the first rounds has a very, very big ripple effect on the rest of your match. And this is partially by design. Like, people like that about Thronefall. We tried minimalizing this effect, and people did not like that. Because people enjoy snowballing their economy. Yeah. It's kind of part of the fun a little bit. But also it creates some very annoying problems where, as mentioned, if you fall behind on the economy, especially if you don't know the game that well yet, you don't understand why all of a sudden the enemies are so difficult and why you can't do anything about them. And the matter of the fact is just you don't have enough gold to deal with them. But yeah, that's very frustrating for players, because you can also restart the knights and retry them, but you don't realize that restarting the knight is not going to fix the problem. Very frustrating. And yeah, the opposite case of snowballing ahead of where you're supposed to be, I guess, is a little bit better, because at least you get the power fantasy of stomping everything into the ground. So that's not as bad, but still a problem if it happens too much and too easily. And yeah, the way I dealt with it a little bit initially was by making enemies drop gold as well. So this way I can ensure you have a minimum amount of gold at each point in time. It's not enough to make the problem go away completely, but it's better than nothing. Like, before the enemies dropped gold, it was like even worse in terms of snowballiness.
Yeah, do the enemies always drop the same amount of gold? Because the problem I imagine the problem I imagine you might run into is by adding more gold with the enemies dropping, that becoming powerful does that become easier? And maybe that's okay, because being really powerful is at least more fun than not being powerful enough.
Yeah, enemies always drop the same amount of gold because we don't want anything intransparent or fishy going on there. We want everything to be easy to understand and reproducible, also because part of the appeal of Thronefall is sort of that it feels like one of those classical RTS games. So one thing we really wanted to have was reproducible build orders. So you can kind of try to figure out build orders and share them with each other and try to refine them and so on. And for that, everything needs to be very fair and reproducible, and you need to know exactly how much gold you're gonna get in each round, so that if you try the same build again, you get the same outcome, basically. And also, it would be kind of unfair if you build 2 extra houses and then enemies drop 2 less gold. That would be unfair to do that without explaining it to the player, because strategizing around what you know is the fun part.
Yeah, another thing, this is reminding me of another conversation I just had with a developer about the pace of their demo. So quick question, did you guys do a demo, or did you just go straight to early access? Okay. So I'm curious with your demo, the developer I talked to, they ramped up what happened at the end of their demo, not like the base game. I'm curious if for your demo you experimented with any, trying to let the player in 20 minutes experience how powerful they would be at the end of the full game or anything like that. Did you guys do anything with that with the demo?
When we released the demo, I think we only had the first level finished anyway, so we just released the first level. And then we released with 3 levels in early access, and that was also all we had at this point. So we always just released what we had.
Yeah, that makes sense with a game with more levels. The game I'm talking about was kind of a different style, so that makes sense.
Are you talking about a game about feeding a black hole?
Yes, I am. Yeah, they did very well, and Corey, one of the developers, came back on to an episode that's not released yet to talk about how well it's done post-launch, and very excited for them. They had a very good launch. Corey was also on your channel. That's part of the way we connected, so that was a lot of fun. Are you happy?
He has interesting perspectives for sure. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. It's fun doing podcasts. Similar to you, I'm kind of in a place where even in just a small amount of interviews, there's a lot of different ideas, which I was a little bit surprised by. And the good news is there's a lot of different routes to success. So that's encouraging. The bad news is there's maybe less of a playbook than you would think. So I'm feeling
that's exactly how I feel as well. Yeah, it's sort of good news and bad news at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Is your team happy that you went with early access? I've heard like Chris Zukowski, for example, kind of pushes against it as a good idea. He maybe wouldn't say that exactly, but I think there's maybe some hesitancy to do early access. So were you happy with that process?
Yeah, in the case of Thronefall, I think it was the correct call, because for us it was a way to communicate that there's not that much content yet. We released with 3 levels, so that was like 2 hours of playtime or something along those lines. And if we had that released as a finished game, then people would have definitely complained that it's too short. But we released it specifically as early access to let people know that more levels are coming. But also it wasn't clear to us how many more levels we're gonna make exactly. So it was also a testing ground for us to decide how much more content to make. And then because it went well, we ended up making I think 6 more levels in total. Yeah, releasing 6 more levels over the course of early access, and going up to, I don't know, maybe 10 hours of playtime if you don't complete all of the bonus objectives, and then way more playtime if you want to 100% it, of course.
Yeah, another thing I was curious to ask you about is, I think you would consider this game, you can correct me if I'm wrong, a pretty small game in terms of the length of development and such, and maybe it became a big game, so you can correct me. But if so, do you think you are more in the camp of making small or medium-sized games? And I guess specifically speaking to either solo developers or hobby developers, or maybe very small teams. Do you think that making small games is a better strategy than trying to do a 4 or 5 year project?
Thronefall is actually not super small. I think it was like 3 years
Yeah,
of
that's probably not a
development,
small game anymore. Yeah.
plus minus or something. 3 years for 2 people. I mean, it's still small, obviously very small if you compare to other projects other people do.
Right.
But compared to the games we would like to do, it's like I think more on the bigger side of the spectrum. And I still think that making small games is generally very good advice, because most games don't sell twice as well if you make them twice as big. So you're trying to sort of give each game like the optimal return of investment point, where it's like, if you make it 2 times as big, it's gonna sell 3 times as well. As long as that's the case, you should keep making it bigger. But once you reach that point where the curve starts going the other way, where if you make it 2 times as big, it maybe sells 20% better, then you should just stop and just make a new game instead. And then not only should you find the correct scope for every game, it's also smart to pick games where this optimal where this point of optimal return on investment is rather early than late, right? For example, if you make an open world game, then making it twice as big is gonna make it more than twice as good more often than if you choose a different project where that point of diminishing return comes earlier. So actually, it's kind of a good thing to sometimes pick these projects where the point of diminishing return comes rather early, because that gives you permission to keep it small. Does that make sense? Do I explain that in a way that checks out?
I think it makes sense to me. I'm curious, what are the things that you're thinking through of those games that would have an early point of diminishing return? Is that mostly focused on genre or your own ability? Or for someone listening, what are the elements that they need to consider to find a game that maybe they could get to the max point in 6 months or a year?
I think it's mostly genre, because some games you just have to put a lot of effort in for them to even become playable, and then even more effort for them to become actually good. And for example, like the best examples, of course, RTS games. Like, to even get one working, you will probably spend half a year, and then to make it good, you'll spend many more years to get it to a level where it can compete with the games that are already out there. Whereas, for example, if you do what Corey did, who's like very clever in the way of the project he chooses and so on, he's like very conscious of that. He chose to make a clicker, like a incremental clicker game, essentially, right?
Yes.
And those have a much earlier point of like where the return on investment starts plateauing. So if you make a game about feeding a black hole twice as big, it's not gonna sell twice as well. It's gonna sell 5% better. So there's like and they probably build pretty exactly to that point where it doesn't make that much sense to make it bigger, where it just makes more sense to make a new game instead.
Yeah,
But all of that being said, one thing you always have to add to this conversation is what you want to make is also a very big part of the discussion. So if you don't want to necessarily optimize for profits, or if you have any personal interest, or if you just want to make a specific type of game, then obviously do that, right? It's like nobody's forcing you. But if you're thinking about it from like a pure business perspective, then do what I just told you. Make small games, make games with good return on investment to the best of your ability. It's not always super easy and super straightforward also to guess what those games are, but it's very mostly genre dependent, I would say.
Yeah, it is amazing the range of what people want to make versus make money and where people's dreams lie. And even in my first interview with Corey, who you've mentioned, I kind of framed it similar to you a little bit in min-maxing and numbers and business side. And I got a few negative comments about that. Like, it ruins the game dev and it's not fun and it's wrong to do the business side. For you, if there's a spectrum of like fully min-max and then fully artist, I'm going to make what I want. How do you try to balance that in your own game development?
No, I think you need to find a healthy balance. I think if you fall too far on either side of the spectrum, it's probably not gonna serve you well. And ironically, I even think if you fall too far on the min-maxing side of the spectrum, that can actually hurt your min-maxing, because people will at some point people will start describing your work as very soulless, and that is actually counterproductive to your min-maxing efforts. So even if you're trying to min-max, you shouldn't go too far to the min-max side of things. You should still try to preserve some of your real passion for the art. And I personally, I try to fall relatively in the middle. I try to do both. And other developers are free to choose other points on the spectrum. For example, Corey decided to fall way more on the min-max side of things. And then there are many other developers that tend to fall way more on the artsy side of things. And in the end, everybody needs to find their own sweet spot on that spectrum, I feel like.
Yeah, as we mentioned before, there's a wide array of what can work and be considered successful. So don't feel like there's a heavy place to lock in. One more question about Thronefall. I've seen some mobile games that seem to be either heavily inspired by Thronefall, if not stolen from Thronefall. How do you feel about that? And have you considered trying to do anything about that?
So it's usually it's not even specifically. So there are a lot of things here. First of all, let's talk about copycats. I don't mind copycats. What I mind much more than copycats are people who are trying to patent game mechanics. They piss me off 10 times, 100 times more than people who are just copycatting other games. I feel like copycatting, at the very least, it's like a process that has some creative value, and that maybe sometimes even spawns copycats that are better than the original, right? So, for example, I might make a game, and somebody decides to copycat my game, but actually makes a better game than I did. I don't see how that's a problem necessarily. I think that's okay. What is, of course, a problem is if they steal very directly. That is not okay. If you like one-on-one copy assets, like if you just straight up copy the homework, that's not okay. Obviously, but if you make a very closely inspired game and it ends up being either better or worse, whatever, I think that's totally fine. And for the case of Thronefall, there are some very closely inspired mobile games. That's correct, especially one very closely inspired mobile game.
Yeah.
And actually, if you play it or if you have a look at how it plays, it's actually not that similar. So in terms of gameplay, it's not that similar. I think they copycatted more like the look and feel, especially for their ads, and that's also where we had the main problems. Was not the game itself; it was more the ads actually. Because for the ads, they one-on-one copied our soundtrack, so they didn't make like a imitation. They literally ripped the music out of our game and our trailer and used it for their ads. And that's not copycatting; that's a copyright violation. So that's not something I'm okay with. That's where I draw the line. Copycatting, as long as you don't copy the homework, that's fine. But straight up stealing assets, that's where I draw the line. That's not okay in my book. And we tried to do something about it, but it's very difficult if these studios are sitting in other countries and are sort of out of reach of your legal system. Then you can ask your lawyer to send a mean letter, and they'll actually take down the ad, but they'll upload a new one the day after. So it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that. I was curious,
Sure.
And yeah, especially with the idea of inspiration versus stealing, and I just thought you clarified that really well. So thank you for that answer.
Yep. Sure.
I would like to move on and ask you a couple of questions about You Snail. Such an exciting and fun game for people because we got to follow along with your journey because you shared so much of it. But first off, we've mentioned talking about genres and choosing a good genre, and someone like Chris Zukowski, the marketing expert, would say, don't do a platformer. Would you agree with that after your experience with You Snail?
If you look at it from a purely business min-maxing side of things, then you should not make a platformer. That's correct. But if you look at it from the artistic side of things, then there are some arguments to make platformers.
Yeah, what was the biggest hurdle you came across in making You Snail?
The biggest hurdle, I mean, You Snail is sort of strange because I made a lot of non-optimal decisions that somehow led to making a game with a lot of personality. I think that's a good thing I would say about You Snail is that it's a game with a lot of soul and personality. It's quite cringe, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's a little bit cringe in places, but it has a lot of personality, and that's partially a result of all of the mistakes I made in the process and all of the non-optimal. It just feels like a work of art because you can see all of the brush strokes and all of the things that didn't go perfectly sort of in it. And yeah, somehow that ended up working out. So what's the question? What was the main challenge? I mean, the challenges in a way, right, shaped the product and made it what it is. Lots of small challenges. Dealing with all of the voice acting, way too much voice acting, Jesus Christ. And yeah, in hindsight, the decision to make a platformer even, wasn't necessarily the best. But yeah, we can say it played out as it was intended by the universe. Will I make another game exactly like You Snail? Probably not. I would make different decisions nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, maybe part of the reason some of those rough edges were there was that you were also working alone. I know you've talked a little bit about this other places, but I'm just curious if you think that for newer developers that there's actually a positive experience to come from working alone, or do you just think small teams are better and you should just jump into small teams?
I think making games alone has one very big advantage for new game developers, and that is that you have to learn the full process. You learn how to make everything from art to sounds to music to coding to balancing, and knowing how to do everything is a big advantage because it gives you a lot more options for who to work with. You don't depend on anyone. You don't need a programmer. You don't need an artist. And not needing something is a big advantage in every negotiation. If you need something, then people can ask more things from you. If you don't need anything technically, then you're in a much better spot for finding good people to work with and so on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Does You Snail make any sales today? Did it have any kind of long tail sales, or is it a dead game?
Depends on your definition. It still makes like $200-$300 every month, which is okay. It's okay. It's like not something you could live off of alone, but it's a nice bonus regardless, right?
Yeah, that does sound like a nice bonus, but yeah, certainly not enough to quit your day job if it was just that. So moving on to Islanders. So it's interesting that this is another, at least art style wise, fairly minimal game. And that one I think you made in school. And so it was a pretty short-term game. Do you think minimal games like that in terms of art are a easier way to develop for small developers?
I think it's a good idea to pick an art style that you can create yourself and make content for easily. We kind of have this saying, be cheap so you can be generous. Unfortunately, we don't entirely know where it's coming from. But essentially what it means is you want your content to be easy to make, cheap to make, so that you can be generous with the amount of content you give to players. And art is a very big bottleneck for creating content. So the reason why we were able to make so many buildings for the first Islanders was because it was very cheap and easy for us to make the buildings. So you want to pick a style that makes asset creation extremely cheap so that you can make a lot of content People nowadays expect a lot of content. So there's no way around it. You gotta make your content cheap enough so that you can make a lot of it.
Yeah, is there anything else? Whenever I look at Islanders, I'm thinking, and referencing back to our conversation about genre, if I picked a genre that would be easy to implement and have that early, ramp up to a good place, I don't think I would add city builder to the list. And so artwork is clearly probably part of the ways you could do that. Were there any other things in development that helped you maybe adapt that genre so that it could be made quickly and effectively in the way you guys did?
Well, Islanders was once again one of those games where we 100% started from the fantasy. Like, we didn't start with the mechanics, we didn't necessarily prototype different game ideas about different things. We had a very clear idea that it would be cool to make a city builder, like the city builder fantasy. And then once you have that, the question is, well, how do we make one in half a year with like the time we had for that student project at game school? And that forced us to look for game systems that make that realistic. And that's where we stumbled upon the proximity mechanic. And that worked out really well for that game.
Yeah, that's awesome to tie that back to this idea also of choosing the fantasy first. And that's cool that you kind of established that early in your career. Yeah. You've also... Go ahead.
I think that's actually a good point. So basically, once you have a fantasy defined, then you should try to figure out how you can serve that fantasy in the most minimal way, right? What does it actually take to satisfy that fantasy? And oftentimes it is much less than you would expect.
Yeah, what would you say is the base fantasy for Islanders that you started with?
Build a city on beautiful islands.
Yeah.
Was like the fantasy for Islanders specifically, the fantasy we started with was building cities.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I've played Islanders. It's very fun. And I thought an interesting decision was that you just move to a new island. There's not really, I'm not really a city builder person, but if you did any research, were you worried at all that city builders would maybe want to build one giant city that you spend 2 hours with, or was that just not in the vision for the game and you just tried to do something else?
So we kind of, Islanders was also kind of born out of a problem or an urge we had with the games that were out on the market at the time. So it was also kind of our way of solving a problem that we saw in other city builder games, which was that we thought city builder games were very enjoyable in the early game, where there's like very limited complexity and everything's sort of simple and very manageable. And then once things get very, very big, they actually we noticed them, they become less enjoyable for us because you harder to keep track of everything and kind of overwhelming at that point. Almost kind of stressful to have to look over so much stuff and keep managing it and so on. So Islanders was also our way of trying to basically only capture the early game feel of a city builder.
Fascinating.
So you don't have to manage. That's why you don't have to manage your existing buildings at all, right? You only have to worry about the building you're placing at the moment, and all of the other buildings don't produce any mental load on you. They're just there. They don't do anything anymore. They're just there to give points for future buildings. And obviously, if you get deeper into it and if you strategize more deeply about how to build your strategy, there's still a lot of depth there, and that you can play with a much higher mental load if you want to. But as the core level, you can also play it as a very brain-off type of game.
Yeah, and approaching it that way has led to a game that is just very zen and super enjoyable, and it's really a treat to play. Now, you've since taken the IP for Islanders and you sold it to another company. Are you happy with that decision?
Yep, we sold it to CodeSync. They made a VR version, and then they went on to make a sequel developed by a studio called The Station. And they made a really fantastic sequel called Islanders New Shores. And I think they managed to improve upon everything we did in the original. Like, there's more buildings, there's new mechanics, there's like an art upgrade, the game looks better, and so on. So it made a really cool sequel. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if it went amazingly well. It almost looks like the first Islanders still went a little bit better. And I wonder why that might be. Probably they waited too long. Probably the market has shifted since then. And just releasing something like Islanders now doesn't work as well as it did when we first released it anymore. Like, kind of the thing with Steam, that also the landscapes are shifting quite quickly. So just because something used to work very well doesn't necessarily mean that it's still gonna work 5 years later, right? So maybe that's a little bit of the problem that happened there. Still, if you want to try Islanders, then I would absolutely recommend you just go with Islanders New Shore. It's just a much better game in every single way, basically.
That was very interesting. Did you guys, whenever you sold the IP, just clean split, write us a check, or were you interested in any kind of recurring revenue or licensing or anything like that?
When we sell an IP, what we mostly want is we want to get rid of the mental load of having to deal with the project. So we want it out of our head so that we can focus on new things. So what we're actually looking for is we're looking for a check, and we're looking to not really engage with the project actively anymore. Like, we're still happy to see what happens with it and hopeful and are rooting for it, of course. But we're like, here you go. That's your problem now. We'll focus on new things. So the easiest, cleanest solution for that is you give us a check, you have the thing, do with it whatever you want. I think in the case of Islanders, I'm not sure if I'm able to disclose the exact specifics, but like I can probably give some vague information. And I think we're still it's a fixed price, but some of that price is paid in revenue share until a certain limit. In the case of Islanders, that is.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious to dive into a couple of other kind of business-minded questions just to hear how you operate. I think you're a really unique case because you're a successful game developer who's also, I think, would widely be considered a successful YouTuber. And just so, how do you balance now, maybe more in this season of life where you've had Thronefall and Islanders and a couple successes now. How are you balancing just in terms of both time and how you think about maybe the income? Where does YouTube fit versus just full-time game dev for you?
YouTube is mostly I mostly see it as a hobby project at the moment. I don't have to do YouTube anymore, I don't feel like. So it's mostly a way for me to share my knowledge and to nerd about game development and have some cool opportunities to connect with people and so on. So it's mostly a hobby project. I don't think it makes too much sense for me, specifically from a financial perspective. Still a little bit of bonus revenue. It still provides cool opportunities. It's still a bit of a safety net. So one way to look at YouTube is also as something that doesn't necessarily give you tons of upside potential. Like you have one YouTube channel, that's not enough to carry the success of a full game. It's just not enough. But it's enough to provide a safety net and to say, okay, I'm gonna have a base layer of people who are gonna play this. So it stops you from failing too hard, maybe, but doesn't turn your game into a hit. It's just not the case. Yeah.
Are you happy that you don't have to rely on YouTube and that there's no pressure to make those videos? Or is there any part of you that misses maybe the days of a couple years ago where maybe this happened? You can correct me if I'm wrong, but where maybe you felt like you had to do YouTube and it was because YouTube's a lot of work. It takes a massive amount of work to do that. So how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I feel very grateful that it has kind of become optional because you're right. I felt like I had to do it when I started because I felt like I have to do something for marketing, right? I can't just make a game and rely that people will play it when it's done. The funny thing is now I do think that. Now I think I could just make a game, and if it's good enough, people would play it if it's done.
Mm-hmm.
My perspective has shifted a little bit there.
Yeah.
Because if your game's good enough, then you can send it to other YouTubers and they will play it and advertise it for you and so on. So it's much more about the quality of the game than I initially thought it was.
Well, and now that you have a following, you could also do the Pontypants method. Are you familiar with Pontypants? Have you seen him on YouTube?
Yeah, sure. I've also talked to him. Cool dude.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Well, he made his first game and did the whole devlog series. And the next game, he just put out one video when it was done, and it got like 1 million views.
Mhm.
And so
Yep.
you also probably have that option as well if you just wanted to go dark on YouTube. We'd all be sad as viewers, but I'm sure that would be successful for you. What are you planning for, let's say, the next 3 years in a business sense? What's Jonas Tyroller? How do you hope that you're spending your days work-wise?
Hopefully releasing. I mean, I have two projects in the works right now, and 2.5 almost. They're like two multiplayer game ideas that are in the making. One smaller multiplayer game project that maybe will serve as a stepping stone for the bigger one. We started prototyping the bigger multiplayer game, and then on the way to prototyping that one, we found a smaller idea that we thought would also work really well. So now we're making the smaller one first and maybe the bigger one after. And other than that, I'm also working on a passion project game, which is a puzzle game called Kobakco for mobile, which that one I maybe spent half a year on this year, and it'll be completely free. There'll be no ads. It'll just be a completely free puzzle mobile game that I'm very passionate about, actually. It's super cool. I love that game. But it's very much made for puzzle nerds. So if you don't like puzzles, you're not gonna like it.
Yeah, it sounds really fun. Would you classify yourself as a puzzle nerd? Is that where this hobby comes from?
Yes, I very much like good puzzle games. And one day I was looking for a simple box pushing puzzle game on the App Store, and I just couldn't find one that satisfied what I was looking for. So I was like, frick me, I'll have to make it. So now I'm making it.
Yeah, well, that's very exciting. I hope that goes well. Of the games you've released so far, which one would you say is the most successful, in however you want to define that?
So commercially most successful, definitely Thronefall. Artistically most successful, maybe some would argue that it's You Snail, but I don't really have any strong opinions about it. Like, artistically, choosing my favorite would be kind of like choosing your favorite child. It's just not something you do.
Yeah. So would you say you're equally proud of all the games that you've made, or does one stand out as one you're particularly satisfied with?
I think that I like all three in terms of. Yeah, I'm proud of all of them. They all have their pros and cons. They're all part of the journey. They all taught me some cool lessons. They're all sort of different things. They're not really comparable. They're all quite different. When things are very different from each other, that makes it difficult to compare. Maybe if I make more games in the same genre, then maybe it becomes a little bit easier to draw direct comparisons. But like for the time being, because the games are just so different, I don't really know how to compare them.
Yeah, that's fair. Another thing that comes up a lot on my channel, I think, is that for a lot of devs that have not released a game yet, or who have not released one that was very successful, is that the main thing they want to do is to be able to make enough money to make games full time. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for a new or solo dev? Just what are the things you need to do to hit those financial successes? If you have any tips.
Oh yeah, we can try to lay out a full game plan. Once again, with the little asterisks that there are different ways to do it. There are different game plans you can use. There's not one way to roam. There are many, many different ways you can take. But let me lay out the game plan that I specifically would use if I had to start from scratch. Maybe let's frame it like that, right?
Perfect.
So if I had to start from scratch, then depending on how much savings I have, I would either go full-time or I would go part-time, depending on what I can afford and like what my life situation is. If I'm like single, living with my parents, whatever, then I might as well go full-time. If I have 2 kids and need to pay the bills, then maybe I would make games in the evening. And then I would probably start out solo and make very, very small games, probably along the lines of a game about feeding a black hole, something that I think has a very high return on investment. And I would try to basically do that to build up some financial stability. And then the more financially stable I become, the more I would focus on satisfying my artistic urges, which is also kind of what you're seeing now with Kobakco. Like Kobakco is like a crap product from a commercial perspective. But I've built up the freedom that I can actually work half a year full time on a free game. And that is a luxury that you need to build up to, right? That's probably not something you can afford right away if making a living off of games is your goal. If you make games as a hobby, sure, whatever. But yeah, definitely pick your projects carefully, make small games solo. And then as you get better at making games, the better your game dev skills are, the easier it is to find people to work with. Because skilled people want to work with skilled people. Doesn't make sense for someone who's like an extremely good artist to work with a beginner programmer who just started making games. The really skilled artist is want to work with a very skilled programmer. So the way you get to work with skilled people is to become very skilled in at least one discipline. And then that's where other very skilled people are gonna want to start working with you. And that's when it's worth it to start teaming up. Till then, just make games solo. But as soon as you find some very skilled people to team up with, then teaming up is, I think, the correct choice. Form like a small team. I think 2, 3, maybe 4 people will be the sweet spot for making indie games at the moment. Any bigger than 4, and you start running into a lot of management overhead. And that's where you stop being a game developer and where you start being a people manager. So if that's something you want to do, sure, go ahead. If you want to make games, then just don't go beyond 4 people on your team.
As someone is following that blueprint, do you think they should also be in that first season where they're working solo? Should they be trying to identify which skill they want to hone in on to become more of a specialist? Like, should that be a season to figure out which one they enjoy the most or have the most, maybe are most acclimated to naturally?
Yeah, good question. I would say, first of all, become a generalist so that you can do the full process on yourself and so that you don't rely on anyone. Because that's the most annoying thing, as mentioned earlier, is if you need someone. That's not a situation that you want to be in. You want to be able to do the whole thing start from finish. That's step 1. You don't have to become an expert at anything. You just got to be able to make a game start to finish, everything that's involved in the process. And then once you have that, then I think it definitely makes sense to think carefully about which things you enjoy, which parts of the process you're good at, and then to specialize on those a little bit. It's definitely useful. Even if you make games alone, then you can still make projects that are very heavy on the things that you like and enjoy and are good at. For example, if you're very good at balancing and math, then it's perfect to make one of those spreadsheet simulator type of games or whatever that also can do really well. If you're really good at art, then you can make an art-heavy game that almost doesn't need any other mechanics. If you're really good at writing, you can make a very writing-focused game. So figuring out what your strengths are and playing into them is a very good idea anyway. After you've mastered the the full process of making a game.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that blueprint. I think that will be very helpful and give some people some very good things to think about. Jumping back to some of your business ideas just a little bit, how important for you in any cycle of the game is marketing and Steam wishlist, and how much are you working towards that?
This is a good question, because that is also something we should definitely mention for the blueprint. Because maybe you're like, yeah, where in the blueprint does the marketing start? I think you should just adapt the philosophy that the game is the bulk of your marketing, and then you just you definitely do some marketing. Don't get me wrong. There's like some things you need to do, but it's a very short checklist that you just go through. You make a Steam demo, you participate in Steam Next Fest, you send your Steam demo to as many content creators as possible. That's kind of it. You have a very good Steam page. That's the fourth one. You need a very good Steam page. You need a very good trailer, like a 5-point checklist. And there's not really much more than that you need to do. You just need to do those 5 points decently well, and your game needs to absolutely slap. And that's kind of it.
Of those 5 things you mentioned, is there one or two that you would spend the most time on, or are they all equally important?
They're all important. I already left out the bonus objectives, right? So these are the 5 main objectives that you have to absolutely get right. You need a good store page, no way around that. You need a good trailer, no way around that. You need to reach out to content creators to play your game, not really a way around that. Forgot about the other 2, but I think they were
you said demo.
Yeah, right, the demo. So the demo is mostly a vehicle actually for reaching out to content creators. So the demo is not really actually for players. The demo is actually mainly for content creators, so that you can get wish lists that way. Not from people playing the demo, from people watching people play the demo. That's where you get the wish lists. Yeah. And then obviously also you need the demo to participate in Steam Next Fest, which Steam Next is just a great opportunity to find players on Steam directly, which is just also something you should do, because there's no reason not to.
Yeah, maybe it's slightly different for you with someone with an audience already, but do you remember with Thronefall how many content creators you reached out to play the demo?
So for Thronefall, we did not do the content creator outreach ourselves. We hired future friends for that. And good question to how many people they reached out to, but I would guess 200 plus probably. So I think that's definitely something you're sort of aiming for, is at least 200 or more. And those 200 are not random content creators. Those 200 are the ones you've specifically selected that have played similar games before and that you think have a decent probability of wanting to try out your game.
Do you think there's any world where a game could succeed if they did most of the marketing after the game was, let's say, maybe not released, but fully completed, and then they maybe tried to cram marketing into the last month before release? Or do you think that would probably automatically put the game in a hard spot?
I had a couple of short internet problems there. Can you repeat the question real quick for me?
Yeah, of course. I was just asking if you think a game for, I think small developers view marketing as maybe a chore or something they don't want to do. So do you think a game that did all of their marketing after the game was completed, and let's say maybe they took a month before they released it, do you think that game could still succeed on Steam, or do you think that would cripple the game too much?
At the moment, the typical playbook is that you do Steam Next Fest and then probably release shortly after, or at the very least before the next Steam Next Fest, right? So could you finish a game and then start marketing? Sure, of course you can do that. Just need to check if that lines up nicely with Steam Next Fest, if like the timings make sense and so on. But also in terms of release dates specifically and so on, Don't make yourself crazy. Just pick something. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I would also like to ask you about some of your podcasting adventures because I know you've done some of that as well. Do you have any guests that either had particularly interesting ideas or just anything standing out about any of the conversations you've had recently on your podcast?
So there were some cool nuggets in every conversation. It's definitely, I think what's just the thing that stood out to me most is just how radically different all of these developers are. But also interesting not to see just the difference, but also try to look for some of the things they have in common. And for example, one of the things that I think, at the very least, the people I invited have in common is they're very analytical. I wonder if it's just the selection of people I invited are very analytical people. Maybe that's the case, because I think I'm quite an analytical person, and maybe I tend to invite other people who kind of think similarly.
Sure.
Could be the case.
Right.
And also there were 2 or 3 developers that I interviewed who were not as analytical, but very gut feeling based. So that definitely also exists. But I think it was definitely interesting how unexpectedly analytical a lot of these devs were, and how deeply they thought and theory crafted about a lot of the things they're doing. Which, I mean, to a certain degree makes sense, right? If you do something full time, you obviously spend a lot of time thinking about it. And I think that showed in almost all of the conversations that they spend a lot of time thinking about games and so on. That was interesting. And also one thing they had in common is most of them agreed that validating your game idea and playtesting are super important. So they all do this sort of differently, but pretty much everybody agrees validating your idea before you start and playtesting a lot while you develop, listening to the community. Those are like 2 cornerstones that no matter which path you choose, you should not skip those 2.
Yeah, it's so helpful to have multiple developers to compare and contrast with, because like you said, there's so many ways to do it, but we really should pay attention to those things that all of these successful game devs are doing. So thank you for sharing that. One interview that I thought was particularly interesting, especially now that we know what's happened, was you interviewed Gavin Eisenbeisz before he released CuFFbust. I'm just curious, and that interview was some time ago, but did you have anything that you felt like maybe you would have done something differently than him, or just if you have any reflections on that podcast now that CuFFbust is out and would be considered maybe not the most successful launch?
Maybe just to quickly clarify the type of relationship I have with Gavin, because I also saw that in the comments that like people were giving me some hate just because I interviewed them. Come on now.
Yeah.
I think we have like a relationship of mutual respect. Like, we don't really talk a lot with each other or anything. I respect his work very much. I think he also respects my work. That's sort of it. And I think the conversation I had with him was super interesting. And I also think he was very right about pretty much almost everything he said. The problem is that game dev is sort of like a minefield, right? You're running over this field and there are a bunch of traps and mines, and you can do a lot of things right, but if you step on one, the whole thing blows up in your face. And I think this is sort of what happened to Gavin, is where he was right about a lot of things, but he ended up being wrong about 1 or 2 critical things, and that killed the project. And that's obviously really unfortunate and really disheartening to see also, because if we imagine this as like a movie scene, it's basically this Gavin running over this minefield, and he's like super sure that he's gonna make it, and he already sees the other side. He's almost made it, right? He has like 100,000 wish lists. It's like the equivalent of being like very sure that he's gonna make it to the other side. And then he only has a couple of steps left and stops looking to the ground because he already thinks he's made it, and boom, there he goes. It's sort of the what happened there. So a little bit tunnel vision. So I think it's very difficult, right? If you have 100,000 wish lists, to then still stay humble and to very critically look at your project is difficult. And it becomes additionally as difficult because other people who you get feedback from also know that it's going really well. So they're like, okay, this has 100,000 wishes. So they see everything in this context. And you give different feedback when you know that. And it's just very... I also had an early playtest version of CuFFbust before it came out. I couldn't test a ton because there were still some bugs that actually stopped me from fully trying the game. But I think I played through the tutorial and I played one round solo of the actual game. And I have to say, I did not spot any super big red flags there. So I thought like the voice acting in the tutorial was a little bit annoying, and then I think I voiced some small concerns about replayability, but like the gravity of the problem was not apparent to me, because that only becomes apparent when you try to play more than one round. So that's also a problem there, that if you need to playtest very carefully, because if you, for example, invite a friend group or something, which Gavin probably did, to playtest 1 or 2 rounds, you might not realize that replayability is the problem. So you need playtesters who play 10 rounds to realize that, right?
Right.
And I think that, combined with the fact that he was like rather sure that it's gonna work out, was the problem there. And I hope, by the way, Gavin, in case you see this, I hope you make a comeback. Don't let this be the end of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be generous to Gavin. I think probably some of what is happening too is that Gavin is or at least he comes across a very confident person. And why wouldn't he be? He was having the most success of any indie developer in the world. And then just a few things, like you said, were a little more critical than he realized. So I thought it was a sad launch for all of the game dev community, and hope that Gavin can turn it around and really rally there. It was interesting. It was interesting you talk about people leaving you negative comments. I've even experienced that on some of my content. How do you handle that? Because even on my tiny channel, people are already a little bit hating sometimes for the ideas.
In that moment, I'm not even sure I felt particularly bad about myself. I felt like more bad for Gavin, because I can't imagine how much people must be shitting on him. Like, it's obviously very satisfying when somebody's very sure of himself to then shit on him if it doesn't work out, which is, I guess, to a degree fair enough, but I'm still don't want to be in that place. And I think we need some culture of forgiveness here a little bit, because we need to realize that making games is very difficult. Like, it's this minefield you run over, and just one misstep can blow the entire thing up. And then, I don't know, to laugh at someone who stepped into one of the mines, it doesn't sit entirely right with me. Could you argue that in this specific case he got a bit cocky, a little overeager, a little, some would say a little greedy, maybe even? Sure, those are fair things to say. But I still hope we can see the picture of what he was trying to achieve is very difficult, and that he's willing to talk about it and share his experience is also generous. He could also just, keep that to himself. So I don't think we should put that into perspective a little bit.
Yeah, that was going to just be my last point to follow it up, is that to my knowledge, I don't think Gavin was trying to sell a course or do anything like that. He was just sharing his ideas, which, as you mentioned, is very generous to be.
That's right.
I think you could argue the most successful game dev pre-launch of CuFFbust that in the world at the moment. You know, he got in the large game show, he had 100,000 wish lists, and to then share his ideas around how he did that. He didn't have to do that. He could have just disappeared. And it's made the pushback against him much stronger. And like you said, some of that is true, but I agree. I would like to see a little bit of a forgiving culture for him, and devs like that.
And now if I try to reflect the same thing on me, and let's say I make a super duper flop game some point, does that devalue all of the advice I've given? Does that warrant shitting on me on my advice giving videos? Like, come on now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that. We can leave the audience to consider those things.
Yeah.
Jumping back to podcasting just a little bit, what do you think makes a good game dev podcast episode? And is there anything that you do to try to bring out the best in your guest?
Meta question there.
Secretly fishing for advice.
Honestly, my approach is to, when I interview people, I just try to learn as much as possible myself, while maybe giving a little bit of necessary context to viewers. So, for example, if I have some insider information or already know a little bit about the people, then I ask some questions to basically have them explain that again, so that we get all to the same level of knowledge. But then from there, what I do is I just ask what I'm interested in and try to learn as much as possible. It's basically, for me, my podcast is a personal learning project that, while I'm at it, I'm sharing with the people who want to see it. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. I try to do something similar, minus I'm not bringing anything to the table. So I'm really just there to learn, which is also a fun place to be.
Oh, for sure.
Now, I would like to also ask you a little bit about your YouTube channel. I mean, most people watching are going to know you from YouTube. You've been on the platform for 8 years, which is pretty awesome. Do you think if you could go back and talk to Jonas from 8 years ago, would you believe the amount of success that you have today and where you're at today?
Obviously, looking at it from 8 years ago, where I'm now, would be a dream come true. I don't know. This is obviously, if you told me back then that I'm gonna make not one but 2 games that are gonna sell over 1 million copies in the next 10 years, I would be, my mind would probably explode. I don't know. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Yeah, I wonder if I got fortunate or what the factor of luck was in all of this. It's like, this was also very reoccurring questions in the podcasts I did, just asking people, how big of a factor is luck, do you think? And it was interesting to see what everybody's response to that one was as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to look back and just admire how much success you've had, and kind of just say, well done. You've done something extremely impressive in your game dev and with your YouTube. And you bring up a super interesting point. Luck is something that has come up in a couple of my podcast episodes. A particularly fun point was I interviewed Corey, who we've already mentioned, and then the partner that he worked with, Andy, who is Aramis on YouTube, and they said opposite things while working on the same game. One said, yes, kind of a lot of luck, and one said, no, almost no luck. After your interviews and your games, where are you? Is it luck to sell a highly successful game?
I think it's a lot of luck, but I don't agree with most of the people who say that there's a lot of luck in where the luck is. I think the luck is in where you are born, which people you meet along the ways, who your parents are. I think that is the luck. And then the developing the game and releasing it and how much attention the game gets, that is not as much luck based. There's still some luck. There's still some factors you can't control. But I don't think it's that much. Can you get extremely unlucky? Yes. But blaming luck when your game failed is, most of the time, it's an excuse, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good answer. For the record, that's basically where I'm at as well. The luck is in what you might call the birth lottery, where you're born, who your parents are, what your income status as a kid is. Those things are luck and random. But once you get to a game in Steam, I think you can do enough inputs to minimize luck to where it's not really too much of a factor.
And this is of course one of those things that people will quote me on if I ever make a failed game.
Yep.
They'll say, "Do you say not luck based?"
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, that will probably happen. I'll probably make a failed game at some point.
Yep, so true. Another thing that's really cool about your YouTube channel is just that you're really good at teaching game design principles. I think particularly a really good video you've made is the search algorithm video, the one with the boat and searching the depths. Yeah, why do you enjoy teaching about game design principles or sharing those thoughts so much? What do you enjoy about that?
I think it's sort of a human instinct to want to share what you've learned. It's almost like this internal primal monkey urge. It almost feels like I need to put it out into the world. It's like it doesn't feel right to just keep the knowledge to myself, almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like it was difficult. The experience was difficult enough to acquire. The least I can do is pass it on. Yeah. And also on top of that, you of course get some nice perks for sharing this stuff. You get recognition, you get gratitude, you get opportunities for collaborations, a little bit of revenue. So there are some additional perks on top of that. So that makes it sort of an easy decision.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing those ideas. I've certainly benefited from some of those videos. I'm curious if you think that YouTube would be worth it for a new game dev in 2026 to do sort of what you have done in this sort of combo.
Depends how much you have to say. I don't think everybody's in the correct situation to start a YouTube channel. I think for me it's comes a bit naturally because I really like theory crafting, and so I never run. I've sometimes I thought I might run out of theories and concepts to share, but I never do. There's always I can kind of come to new realizations, and there's always more I want to talk about. And if you're that kind of person, then 100% start a YouTube channel. I think it's super satisfying, and it comes with some very nice perks. If you don't really have any interesting stories to tell, then I'm not as sure if you should. Also, I think maybe one slightly more, like if you're doing purely min-maxing, then maybe the first thing I would look into would be vertical short form content, not necessarily long form content. Because that's a bit easier to produce, and also easier to produce as like basically pure advertising type of content. You can just make videos just showing your game, showing cool stuff in your game, showing some funny bugs you had or something. Whereas if you make long form videos, then you need to become a bit better at storytelling, communicating, structuring, and you need to have some interesting things to say. Whereas making some brain rot videos about your game, I think that's easy enough. It's not easy, it requires some skill, as everything does. But it's a bit more manageable, I hope, maybe.
Yeah, if anyone's considering the short form content, you have a really good interview with the creator of Bopple Battle, who was really successful with short form content. So people can go check out that episode if they want a little more of a deep dive. I really enjoyed that one. Just to close out our time, I asked my viewers if they had any questions for you. And so I have a couple of questions that are from viewers. Some of them might be quick, maybe some not, but we'll see. What are your favorite game genres to play?
Strategy, puzzle, and exploration.
Very good. How did it feel when 8-Bit Ryan played Will You Snail?
I saw that question because you sent me the questions beforehand, and I had to look up who 8-Bit Ryan is again.
I also
because I
don't know
did
who
not,
he is.
I
I'm
did, I
sorry.
did not, I did not remember.
Uh-huh.
So I think when I saw that back then, I probably didn't think, oh my god, 8-bit Ryan played my game. I probably thought, oh my god, cool, a big channel played my game. That's probably
Yeah.
what I thought.
Yep.
So I'm pretty sure I saw it back then. I'm also pretty sure I was pumped about it. But I didn't have like a direct connection because I just did not know the channel.
Yeah. Sorry, Ryan. I also don't know who you are. What do you like to do for fun when you're not deving?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, this sort of silly thing is I like to do programming projects in my free time also. So I do programming for work, and then when I get home, I often have the urge to do some more programming.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's that, and then I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is sort of a nice way for me to. I know it's a bit cliche, and everybody is kind of into that at the moment, but it's I kind of get it because it's such a nice way to balance out office work and sitting in front of a screen all day. Because what I do for my game dev job is I sit in front of a computer screen. I'm all alone,
Right.
nobody around me, not anywhere near to seeing people. And then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the exact opposite. You don't sit, you move yourself, and there's tons of people. And you get to interact with those people. You get very close and kind of intimate with those people in a non-romantic way, of course. And I think that's a really nice compliment to the type of work I do. I think that works really well. I also like playing board games. I like playing video games, of course. That's sort of it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Do you plan to release a game in 2026?
I hope so. I hope to release two. I hope both Kobakco as well as our first multiplayer game will come out this year. Maybe for the multiplayer game, this year is a bit optimistic, but we'll start with the optimistic timeline and see where it goes from there.
Very good. And then this question is a little bit longer, but I thought it was a good one, so I'm just going to read it directly. The question says, I think he once said that making a game fun isn't much of a challenge anymore, that he is confident he can keep tweaking a game until it's fun. I'd ask him to expand on that process more, since I feel like it's legitimately one of the hardest parts, and many devs, including myself, tend to struggle with it.
Yeah, I think I still stand by that. I think making a game that's fun is really not the main problem for me personally anymore. I wonder how to best explain it. It's sort of like it almost feels like it's become a little bit of just a technical skill. I just feel like I know how to do it, and people will then once again quote me on this once I inevitably release a game that is horrible and not fun at all.
Do you think it's something that a developer just sort of learns as you make more games? Like, is there not really a particular thing to do, but this is maybe just an experience that you sort of a vibe check kind of thing?
I think understanding what fun really is and how it emerges really helps a ton. And if you want some in-depth inspiration for that, then you should probably read the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I think he just hit it exactly on the head with what fun is. Fun is focus. I'm currently working on a video about this, and it's going to be a very long and beefy video. So trying to summarize this in a short and concise way is definitely tricky for me. But I think that fun and learning are extremely related. I think when you're learning efficiently, you're essentially having fun, and it's not like there's some overlap. I think it's almost the same thing. I think efficient learning is rewarded by evolution with fun. If you're learning efficiently, nature says, cool, I like that. You're having fun right now, so that you keep learning and do more of that. And whenever anything happens that decreases the efficiency of your learning, then you have less fun as a result of that. For example, if you don't get any feedback from your environment, you can't learn as efficiently, and therefore it is also less fun. And when you think about all of the things that make something less fun, it's always the things that also make it a worse learning environment, funnily enough. So when somebody constantly comes into your room and interrupts you, that's not very fun. And that also makes it a worse learning environment. If you can't properly focus because there's too much noise going on the screen, that makes it a worse learning environment. The only thing that's sort of what's sort of the ironic thing about it is that I don't think fun rewards learning useful things. So evolution doesn't care if you're learning useful things at all. It just cares if you're learning or not. So you could be learning something completely, utterly useless, but as long as you're learning efficiently, you'll have a lot of fun doing so.
Yeah. Well, if anyone is dissatisfied,
If
anyone is dissatisfied with that answer, they can subscribe to you on YouTube and wait for the big beefy video and get more.
Yeah, and to get back to how I go about making anything fun, I think if you put it into perspective and think about how little it actually takes for someone to have fun, is just the example I like to give is a rhythm game. A rhythm game is just they're like things coming from the top or something, and you have to press the button at the correct time. And that is really, if you think about it, this kind of a silly activity. But it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you good feedback. It gives you a way to learn and get better. And that's enough for you to have fun. So it's not that difficult actually. And if you know these kinds of things, and then you put playtesting into the mix, and you also observe others and see why and how they're having fun or not, I think it becomes very easy to detect why it's not fun and then to fix it. You basically only have to ask what makes this a worse learning environment, what makes this either frustrating or boring, and fix it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This has been an absolutely incredible interview. I've had a great time. I would like to leave you with one final question here. This is the Dev Dream podcast, and I made it to help keep myself inspired by talking to other amazing people like yourself. And so I'm just curious for you, what would you say is your game dev dream in this season of life?
Finding balance in all of the things I do. Correct balance between all of this is something I often struggle with, is just juggling too much at once. So I hope I can somehow achieve this internal feeling of balance and inner peace in all of that chaos, if that makes sense. And another stretch goal will maybe be to publish a board game at some point. I think that'd be really cool to see a board game with my name on it in the shelves someday. Don't even really care about the name, just want to put a board game into the shelves.
Yeah, well, Jonas, that's a fantastic dream. I hope you're able to make both of those things a reality. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the fantastic questions, and thank you for watching. Bye.
Thank you for watching this full episode of the Dev Dream podcast with Jonas. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. If you want to let me know that you made it this far, leave whatever emoji you best think represents Thronefall with no context in the comment section to confuse all the normies that didn't get this far. Also, just as one more reminder, leave a hype if you're willing to. It would really help me out. And if you're looking for more game dev content, I think you'll enjoy this video on the screen.